A young woman named Amina had been traveling for work for almost 3 years, flying from city to city as quietly as possible. She was not the type who enjoyed attention or special treatment. She usually sat in the back rows of the plane, placed her small bag under the seat, and spent most of her flights reading or resting. She liked peace, routine, and predictable moments. But on this particular morning, things were different from the moment she arrived at the airport. Her flight was already crowded. When she reached the airline counter, a long line stretched across the floor, full of tired travelers waiting to check in. Amina joined the end of the line, holding her backpack close to her chest. She wasn't in a rush. She had arrived early, as she always did, because she disliked last-minute stress. She didn't know that something unexpected was waiting for her after almost 20 minutes of slow movement. She finally reached the front of the line. The airline employee behind the counter looked at her ticket and typed something into the computer. His eyebrows lifted. "Ma'am, you've been upgraded," he said. Amina blinked, unsure she heard correctly. Upgraded. Yes, to first class. You can board early as well. For a moment, she just stared, confused. Nobody had ever placed her in first class before. She didn't even understand why it would happen today. It wasn't her birthday. She wasn't a frequent first-class passenger, and she didn't buy any special package. She wondered if there had been a mistake. "Are you sure?" she asked. The employee nodded with a friendly smile. "Yes, it's completely valid." "Enjoy your flight." Amina thanked him softly and walked away, still unsure how she felt. The idea of sitting in first class made her a little nervous. She wasn't used to that kind of space or attention. She imagined herself sitting among people who traveled in luxury constantly, people who probably wore expensive clothes and carried designer bags. She looked down at her simple shirt and comfortable pants. She looked normal, plain, maybe even too ordinary for such a place. Still, she told herself it was fine. A seat was just a seat. Everyone on the plane was going to the same destination. She didn't want to overthink. She took a slow breath and went through security, then headed toward the gate. When she reached the boarding area, she noticed that first-class passengers had their own line. It was much shorter only. A few people were standing there, and they all carried themselves with confidence. Some were talking on phones, others checking expensive watches or tapping on sleek laptops. Amina hesitated before joining the line. She stood at the back, trying not to draw attention to herself. She felt eyes turn toward her just for a second, as if some people were quietly wondering if she had entered the wrong line. She pretended not to notice. When boarding began, the staff greeted every first-class passenger warmly. When Amina reached the front, the attendant scanned her ticket and smiled. "Welcome aboard." Amina gave a polite nod and stepped into the jet bridge. The cool air inside the aircraft brushed across her face as she entered. She looked around slowly, taking in the first-class cabin. The seats looked bigger than anything she had ever seen on a plane wide. Soft with small lamps, footrests, screens larger than the ones in economy. She walked toward her seat, trying not to look lost. Her seat was next to the window, and she placed her backpack gently in the overhead bin. When she sat down, she felt the difference immediately. The seat was soft and comfortable, almost like a living room chair. She took a breath and reminded herself that she had every right to sit there. The ticket was in her hands. She hadn't stolen it. Just when she began to relax, she heard 2 voices approaching. A well-dressed couple stopped near her row. The woman glanced at Amina briefly, then whispered something to the man. He frowned and looked again. Amina pretended to check the screen in front of her, though she felt the judgment like a light tap on her shoulder. The couple sat across the aisle. The woman opened her bag and took out a magazine. The man placed his watch in front of him as if he wanted everyone to see how shiny it was. Amina turned her face to the window. She didn't want to assume anything. Maybe they weren't judging her. Maybe they were just talking about something else. But a part of her felt uneasy. She could sense when people looked at her differently. It had happened before during work trips, during business meetings, even while shopping. Some people made quick guesses about her based on very little. A flight attendant walked by and offered her a drink. Amina politely declined. She didn't want to appear demanding. She didn't want to stand out. A few minutes later, more passengers entered the cabin. A man in his late 50s took the seat beside her. He looked tired but peaceful. He gave her a small smile. "Long flight?" he asked in a soft, friendly tone. "Not too long," she replied. "But I'm glad to be heading home," he nodded. "Same here. These trips can get tiring." It was a simple conversation, but it helped ease her nerves a little. She appreciated the kindness. The cabin continued filling with passengers, though it was quieter than the rest of the aircraft. People in first class rarely spoke loudly. Everything felt controlled, calm, and intentional. But Amina could still feel the occasional glance from the couple across the aisle. At one point, she heard the woman say quietly, "They really let anyone upgrade these days." The words weren't shouted, but they were loud enough. Amina felt her chest tighten. She didn't respond. She didn't even look up. She had learned throughout her life that reacting to such comments rarely changed anything. People who judged others so quickly usually didn't stop because someone asked them to. Still, it hurt. She wondered if the couple thought she didn't deserve to sit there. She wondered if they assumed she couldn't afford it. She wondered why people cared so much about where someone sat on a plane. She reminded herself to stay calm. She reminded herself that she was there because the airline placed her there. She reminded herself that her value wasn't decided by strangers. But even with these thoughts, she couldn't help feeling like she was being watched. As more passengers settled, a soft announcement played through the speakers, telling everyone that the flight would begin boarding economy next. The cabin doors were still open, and more noise drifted in from the walkway. Amina leaned back slightly and tried to focus on her breathing. She hoped the rest of the flight would go peacefully, but something told her that the day had more in store, something she wasn't expecting. She didn't know that within the next few minutes, her quiet presence in first class would become the center of attention. And she definitely didn't know that someone important on the plane already knew who she was. If she had known, she might not have felt so alone in that moment. But for now, she sat silently, unaware that her simple upgrade would begin a chain of events that would change the entire atmosphere of the flight. As the cabin prepared for takeoff, Amina took one last look around. She didn't see anything unusual, just passengers adjusting seats, attendants organizing trays, and the same couple across the aisle whispering behind raised hands. She didn't know that the quiet before takeoff was just the beginning of a very unexpected journey. The cabin doors were still open, and passengers from economy were lining up outside, waiting for their turn to board. Amina sat still in her large seat, trying to focus on the quiet hum of the air conditioner instead of the whispers from across the aisle. She wished, just for a moment, that she had not been upgraded. It almost felt easier to stay invisible in the back rows, where nobody cared who she was or why she was sitting there. But today, she was in the center of first class, and not everyone liked it. The couple across the aisle kept exchanging looks, their expressions filled with a mix of annoyance and disbelief. The woman finally spoke again, louder this time, as if she wanted others around to hear. "I just don't understand why airlines do this," she said. "It ruins the whole atmosphere when they let people who clearly don't belong take these seats." Amina felt the words push against her chest. She wanted to shrink into her seat, disappear behind the headrest, or maybe pretend she hadn't heard anything. But the tone was sharp, the intention clear. It was meant for her. The man beside the woman nodded in agreement. "It used to be different. Now it's like anyone with a random ticket can walk in here. Makes you wonder what standards are left." The man sitting next to Amina glanced across the aisle, annoyed, but remained silent. He looked like the type who avoided conflict. He shifted slightly and gave Amina a brief, understanding look, as if to say, "Ignore them." But ignoring wasn't easy. Every comment felt like a small pin pressed gently against her skin, sharp enough to feel, not sharp enough to bleed. Amina lowered her eyes and silently tightened her grip on her armrest. She reminded herself that these were just strangers. Their opinions did not shape her life. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know that she worked hard every day, that she supported her family, that she traveled because her job required it, not because she liked the luxury of upgrades. Still, it hurt. A flight attendant approached again to offer refreshments before takeoff. She stopped near the rude couple first. "Would you like something to drink before we leave?" the attendant asked. "Yes," the woman said. But maybe check the seating list again. Some people might be in the wrong section. She didn't look at Amina directly, but the direction of her voice was obvious. The attendant gave a polite smile, though her eyes showed a brief flicker of discomfort. All passengers in this cabin are correctly seated, ma'am. The woman raised her eyebrows, unimpressed. If you say so. Mina looked out the window again, pretending she was too distracted by the view to care. But the words replayed inside her head, heavier each time. The attendant moved toward Amina next. Her tone softened. Would you like a drink before we take off? Amina shook her head gently. No, thank you. I'm okay. The attendant nodded and walked away, leaving Amina alone with her thoughts, but the couple wasn't finished. These upgrades are getting ridiculous, the man muttered, pretending to adjust his seat. If people want first class, they should pay for it, not depend on handouts. Amina's stomach tightened. She felt her cheeks grow warm. She wished she could say something, anything, to defend herself, to explain that she hadn't begged for this seat, that she wasn't taking anything from anyone. But she didn't want to start a scene. She didn't want other passengers watching her. She had learned, through many experiences, that staying quiet sometimes felt safer. The man sitting beside her finally spoke, gently but clearly. Everyone here has a right to their seat, he said. No need to judge people you don't know. The couple turned toward him, as if surprised someone had challenged them. I wasn't judging, the woman said, though her voice betrayed her. I'm only talking about airline policies, obviously. The man beside Amina replied calmly. It still sounded unkind. That's all. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes, ending the conversation. Amina felt grateful, even if she didn't say anything. That small act of support meant more than he probably realized. But the couple went quiet, only for a few minutes. As the last of the economy passengers boarded, the cabin grew louder. A group of people passing by glanced into first class, admiring the large seats and the peaceful atmosphere. One woman smiled at Amina, maybe thinking she looked friendly. Amina smiled back softly, but that was enough to trigger another comment from the woman across the aisle. See? Even the economy passengers look surprised when they see her here. It's obvious she's not used to this section. The man chuckled lightly. Probably her first time. Amina clenched her hands together. She wished she could pretend she hadn't heard. But she had. And each word felt heavier than the last. She wondered why people cared so much about someone else's seat. Why did her presence bother them? She wasn't loud. She wasn't making demands. She wasn't causing problems. She was simply sitting. A flight attendant made another round, asking passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Amina followed the instructions quietly. She tried to focus on the movements outside the window bags being loaded, ground staff waving signals, the sun slowly rising over the runway, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the couple. She felt embarrassed. Not because of anything she did, but because she felt outnumbered. Because she felt like she didn't belong, even though she hadn't forced herself into the seat. Because strangers were judging her without knowing her story. And even worse, other passengers were listening. Across the cabin, a few people glanced in their direction. Some looked unsure. Others looked uncomfortable. But no one else said a word. They didn't want to get involved. Amina took a slow breath. She told herself to stay calm. The flight hadn't even taken off yet. She didn't want to spend hours feeling small, but just when she thought she could settle, get through the rest of the journey quietly, the worst moment of the boarding process arrived. A man walking down the aisle stopped near the rude couple and leaned forward to put something in the overhead bin. His arm accidentally brushed the woman's shoulder. She frowned and pulled back quickly. Watch it. He apologized immediately. I'm sorry, it was an accident. She shook her head dramatically. This is exactly why upgrades should be controlled. Suddenly, everyone thinks they can just push themselves into first class and act with zero manners. Mina wasn't even part of the interaction. But the implication was strong enough to make her flinch inside. The woman wasn't just rude. She was the kind of person who believed she deserved more than others simply because she had a better ticket, or because she thought she was more important. The man across the aisle from Amina gave the rude woman a cold stare. He said it was an accident. There's no need to insult him or anyone else. The woman ignored him. Amina tried to look calm, but inside she felt her heart beating faster. It was exhausting to sit there, listening to disrespect through thin layers of polite words. The man beside her leaned toward her slightly and whispered, "Don't let them bother you. People like that always look for someone to put down." Amina nodded faintly. She appreciated his attempt to comfort her. But her chest still felt heavy. She wondered if the flight crew had noticed the tension. They seemed busy with final checks. The lead flight attendant passed through again, making sure everything was in order. She paused near the rude couple when the woman called her. "Excuse me," the woman said, raising her hand. "Can you check our seating again? I want to make sure there weren't any booking errors." The attendant kept her tone professional. "Your seats are correct, ma'am. And what about hers?" The woman tilted her chin toward Amina without even looking at her directly. Amina froze. The attendant followed the gesture, then responded firmly, "Her seat is correct as well." The woman sighed loudly. Unbelievable. The attendant didn't reply. She simply moved on, though she gave Amina a brief, kind glance before she left. Amina swallowed. She felt her throat tighten again. She wasn't someone who cried easily. But moments like this, moments where people decided her worth based on nothing, made her chest ache in a way that was hard to explain. She wondered how long this flight would feel. But she didn't. Know something important. Someone on the plane had already noticed the situation. Someone who had a much bigger role than any passenger. Someone who was about to step out of the cockpit right now. While the rude couple whispered and Amina stared quietly out the window, the captain of the plane had been informed of a passenger concern. First class, he wasn't the type to ignore such things. In a few minutes, everything in the cabin would shift. But for now, Amina sat still. Unaware that the flight was about to take a turn she'd never expected, the sound of the cabin door closing echoed softly through the first-class section. Marking the moment when the plane was finally ready to leave the gate, the atmosphere inside had a strange heaviness to it, almost like the calm before a heavy storm. Amina could feel it pressing on her chest as she adjusted her seatbelt. She tried to keep her focus outside the window, watching the airport workers move away from the aircraft. The runway stretched far into the distance, bathed in the warm morning light. Planes were taking off one by one, rising slowly before disappearing into the pale sky. If she could just hold on to that view, she told herself, maybe the rest of the flight would feel easier. But peace wasn't meant for her yet. The couple across the aisle wasn't done making her feel unwelcome. As soon as the plane began backing away from the gate, the woman leaned forward slightly and spoke in a tone meant to, "Carrie, I just hope they don't start crowding first class with people who don't know how to behave," she said. Amina closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't need to look to know the comment was directed at her. The man sitting beside the couple laughed quietly under his breath, as if he found her words amusing. Amina tightened her fingers together slowly, pressing her palms against each other. She didn't know what made people speak like that. She didn't know why her presence alone could irritate them so much. She wasn't loud. She wasn't demanding. She wasn't causing trouble. She was just there, and somehow that was enough to bother them. The man seated beside Amina noticed her discomfort. He spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "Try to ignore them. Some people need to look down on others to feel higher themselves." Amina nodded slightly. But ignoring wasn't easy when the comments kept coming like small stones thrown her way. The plane continued to taxi toward the runway. The hum of the engine grew louder, filling the cabin with a steady vibration. Amina pulled her cardigan tighter around her arms, trying to feel grounded. She could hear the faint clicking of seatbelts being checked, the soft footsteps of attendants moving through the aisle for their final inspection. The rude couple's voices rose again. "I still say something feels off," the woman muttered. "Look at her clothes. Look at her bag. She doesn't look like she belongs here." "Maybe it was a mistake," the man replied. "Or maybe she has a friend working at the airline. Some people always find shortcuts." Amina pressed her lips together. Their words stung not because they were true, but because they weren't. She had done nothing wrong. Yet she felt guilty for sitting in a seat she didn't choose. A flight attendant approached to ensure everyone's tray tables were secured. She looked toward the couple and then to Amina. She must have sensed the tension again. "Is everything all right here?" the attendant asked gently. The woman across the aisle spoke before anyone else. "Everything is fine. We were just hoping the cabin stays peaceful." The way she said peaceful felt like another insult. Amina kept her voice soft. "Everything is fine," she echoed, even though it wasn't. She didn't want more trouble. The attendant lingered for a moment, her concerned eyes flickering between Amina and the couple. But she couldn't force the passengers to be kind. So she gave a slight nod and continued up the aisle. Moments later, the pilot's voice came through the speakers. "We are cleared for takeoff. Flight attendants, please take your seats." The engines roared louder, and the plane began speeding down the runway. Amina held the armrest and looked out the window as the aircraft lifted into the sky. The ground grew smaller and smaller, the airport shrinking into tiny shapes. But even with the beauty outside, she couldn't ignore the pressure inside her chest. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, a soft chime rang through the cabin. Passengers began relaxing, adjusting their seats, or reaching for the menus the airline provided. Amina reached for nothing. She didn't want to move. She didn't want to draw attention. She hoped the couple would finally get busy with their drinks or entertainment screen. Maybe then they would forget she existed. But that hope disappeared quickly. The man across the aisle leaned forward unexpectedly and tapped Amina's arm. She turned, surprised. "Yes?" she asked gently. He gave a half-smile that wasn't friendly. "I just wanted to ask something. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Amina's heart dropped. "Yes," she replied softly. "This is my seat, you're certain?" He asked again, as if she didn't know how to read her own boarding pass. Amina nodded. "Yes, I am." The woman beside him let out a dramatic sigh. Unbelievable. First class should mean something. Doesn't it frustrate you when rules are bent? Amina felt her throat tighten. She didn't want to argue, but being silent was becoming harder. She spoke with calm she didn't feel. "I didn't ask for the upgrade. They gave it to me at the counter." The man smirked. "Sure they did. Happens all the time, right? People just randomly get the best seats on the plane." Amina felt something twist inside her. It wasn't anger. It was something more complicated, hurt mixed with confusion. She didn't understand why they were so determined to make her uncomfortable, the woman added. "Well, next time they should think twice." Amina looked down at her hands. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to shake. But the pressure was building. Another passenger nearby overheard and turned his head slightly. He didn't speak, but his expression showed discomfort at the couple's behavior. Still, nobody stepped in. The cabin became quieter for a moment as the flight attendants began serving drinks. The lead attendant reached Amina first. "Would you like something?" she asked. Amina shook her head again. "No, thank you." "Are you sure?" "We have fresh juice, tea, coffee. I'm fine," Amina whispered. The attendant nodded gently. Sensing the strain in Amina's voice, she moved on to the couple. The woman ordered something and then added loudly, "Can you please make sure no one from economy wanders up here later? Some people try to sneak in." Amina felt a stab in her chest. She didn't want the attendant to misunderstand. The attendant simply smiled politely and said, "We always monitor the cabin, ma'am." Then she walked away. The couple exchanged a satisfied look. As if they had accomplished something, Amina looked back out the window, her eyes slightly wet. She tried to blink away the sting. She told herself to be strong. She told herself this moment wouldn't last forever. But her courage was slowly wearing down. She wondered if she should call the attendant quietly and ask to move to economy. She didn't want special treatment. She didn't care about big seats or extra legroom. She just wanted peace. She was about to unbuckle her seatbelt when something unexpected happened. A hand gently rested on the top of her seat. A voice deep, calm and steady spoke from behind her. "Is everything all right here?" Amina turned slightly. The captain was standing right beside her row. This was extremely unusual. Captains almost never walked the cabin after takeoff, especially not this early in the flight. The rude couple froze. A few passengers nearby turned their heads. Surprised Amina blinked, confused. Yes, I mean, everything is fine, she said softly, though her voice trembled slightly. The captain observed her closely. Noticing her tired eyes and shaky hands, he then turned to the couple across the aisle. Is there a problem? He asked politely, but his tone carried quiet authority. The woman opened her mouth but seemed at a loss for words. No problem, she said quickly. The man forced a smile. We're fine. But the captain wasn't convinced. I received a message from the cabin crew that there were concerns about passenger comfort in this section, he said. I wanted to make sure everyone feels safe and respected. The couple stiffened in their seats. They didn't dare speak. Amina looked down again, too embarrassed to meet anyone's eyes. The captain didn't pressure her to speak. Instead, he stepped a little closer so that only she could hear him. If you need anything, he said softly, or if someone is making you uncomfortable, please let me know. Amina swallowed. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded, and I offered her a reassuring smile. Then, he turned to the couple, and I hope everyone remembers that kindness and respect are part of the flight experience, he said gently. For all passengers, the message was clear. The couple didn't respond. The captain gave Amina one last supportive look before walking back toward the cockpit. A hush fell over the cabin. Amina felt her heartbeat slowing down just a little. The captain's presence had created a shift, like a quiet light pushing back the darkness. But the moment wasn't the end. The real truth. The real connection between the captain and Amina was still hidden, and soon everyone on the plane would learn it. The next morning came with a strange quietness, kind that makes a person feel something important is waiting just ahead. Even though everyone had agreed to meet early, the house felt unusually calm. The sunlight touched the walls softly, and the air outside was cool enough to make each breath feel clear and fresh. It was the kind of morning that carried hope without saying a word. She woke up slowly, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. For a moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling as the memories of the last few days rushed back the courtroom humiliation. The unexpected support, the long conversations that followed, and the quiet understanding that grew between everyone involved. It all felt heavy yet strangely uplifting at the same time. She finally sat up, stretched, and went to the window. Outside, she saw the car already parked near the gate. He was leaning against it, hands in his pockets, looking like someone who had been awake for hours. He always liked being early. It made him feel prepared. She smiled a little at that. Even from a distance, there was something steady and comforting about him. She took a quick breath, got ready, and stepped out of the house. As soon as he noticed her, he pushed himself upright and gave a small nod, something simple, but warm enough to show he was glad she was there. The drive was quiet at first. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The road stretched out ahead of them, framed by tall trees and the soft glow of the morning sun. After a while, she spoke. You think today will be better? She asked softly. He glanced at her before returning his eyes to the road. I think today will be honest. That's enough. She nodded. Honest sounded more realistic than perfect. They reached the community center where they were all supposed to meet. The place looked simple, clean benches outside, wide steps leading to the front door, and a few people heading in for morning classes. They waited near the entrance until the others arrived. One by one, everyone from the previous day showed up. The same people who had stood by her, the same ones who had seen the way things unfolded in the courtroom. Today felt different, though. No tension, just a sense of purpose. Inside the hall was arranged in a circle. Chairs were set out neatly, and the air smelled faintly of fresh coffee. The atmosphere was calm, nothing dramatic, nothing overwhelming, just a space for people to speak without fear. They all sat down, forming a circle that felt surprisingly supportive. She noticed that even the officials who had been so dismissive earlier looked more attentive today. Maybe it was the pressure from the witnesses. Maybe it was guilt settling in. Or maybe they simply realized how wrong the situation had become. The room went silent for a moment. Then the coordinator stepped forward and invited her to speak first. Her hands trembled slightly. But she didn't try to hide it. She took a long breath and began. "I didn't come today to argue," she said quietly. "I just want to be understood. I want people to know that dignity matters, no matter who you are. No one deserves to be treated like they don't count." The room stayed still as her words settled in the air. She continued, "What happened in the courtroom? It wasn't just about me. It happens to many people, and it shouldn't. That's why I'm here. Not to fight, but to make sure it doesn't happen again." Her voice trembled only once, but she held herself steady. The coordinator nodded at her gently, and then invited others to share their thoughts. One by one, the people who had witnessed everything spoke up. Some talked about fairness, some about respect, some about how small actions can harm or heal others. Each person added a piece to the truth. When it was his turn to speak, he leaned forward slightly and rested his hands together. "What I saw," he said calmly, "was someone being judged before anyone even bothered to understand her situation. I stepped in because it was wrong. And if we let things like this slide, then we're part of the problem too." His words made a few heads lower, especially among those who had acted coldly the day before. The conversation went on for a while. Nothing heated, nothing loud, just quiet honesty. It was the kind of discussion that slowly changes people without them realizing it immediately. By the end of the meeting, the room felt lighter. People stood up, exchanged nods, and walked out with thoughtful expressions. She felt something shift inside her, a sense of relief mixed with pride. She had spoken up not only for herself, but for others who couldn't. Outside, the sun was brighter now. The air had warmed just enough to feel pleasant. She and he walked out together, side by side. "You did well," he said softly. She let out a small laugh. "I was terrified." "Courage isn't about feeling brave," he replied. "It's about doing the right thing, even when you're scared." She looked down, smiling quietly. That was something she knew she would remember. They didn't go home immediately. Instead, they headed to a nearby cafe. It was a modest place with wooden tables, warm lights, and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. They sat near the window, watching people pass by. For the first time in days, she felt genuinely calm. "How do you feel now?" he asked as he stirred his tea. "A little lighter," she said, "like something heavy finally loosened." "That's good," he said. "You earned that." She looked outside again, letting her thoughts drift. She realized how much had changed in such a short time. Not just the situation, but the way she viewed herself. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the courtroom feeling helpless. She had found her voice as they talked. She noticed the way he listened carefully, sincerely, without trying to fix everything. That kind of presence felt rare these days. She appreciated it more than she could explain. After finishing their tea, they stepped outside and walked slowly toward the car. Halfway there, she stopped. "Thank you," she said softly. He turned to her. "For what?" "For being there. For not walking away when things got complicated." "People don't usually do that," he shrugged lightly. "Sometimes the right thing is simple. People just forget to choose it." She nodded. She understood. They drove home with the window slightly open, letting the fresh breeze fill the car. The road felt different now, less uncertain, more familiar. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but she also knew she wouldn't be facing them alone. When they reached her house, she hesitated before getting out. "You'll come tomorrow too, right?" she asked. He smiled softly. "Of course. We've started something important. We're going to finish it together." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. Not romantic, not dramatic, just genuine comfort. She nodded and stepped out of the car as she walked to her door. She felt the morning sun on her back and the quiet strength of everything she had learned. Life wasn't suddenly perfect, but it felt possible again, and sometimes that was more than enough. Inside her home, the silence felt peaceful instead of lonely. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and allowed herself to breathe freely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new steps, new conversations. But today had shown her something important. She wasn't powerless, she wasn't alone, and she had every right to stand tall. The day ended quietly, but with a sense of hope that reached every corner of her thoughts. Whatever came next, she knew she would face it with courage she didn't know she had until now. And with people who believed in her standing nearby, she finally felt strong enough to move forward without fear. The next day began with a quiet tension in the air, the kind that comes when something important is about to happen. She woke early, long before the sun was fully up, and sat at the edge of her bed for several minutes, just breathing. Today felt like a turning point. She didn't know how everything would unfold, but she knew she was no longer the person who stayed silent when treated unfairly. She got ready slowly, taking her time as if preparing herself not just for the day, but for a new chapter of her life. When she stepped outside, he was already waiting in the same spot as before, leaning casually against his car with his arms lightly folded. The sight brought a small comfort to her heart. No matter how uncertain things felt, his steady presence made them easier to face. He gave her a slight nod when she approached. "Ready?" "As ready as I can be," she replied. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the early morning light turning the sky a soft golden color. The road ahead stretched long and calm, but she could feel her heart beating faster than usual. He noticed her fidgeting with her hands. "Nervous?" he asked. "Maybe a little," she said with a small laugh. "I don't want today to go wrong." "It won't," he said in a steady voice. "You've already done the hard part." She looked out the window, letting his words settle. Maybe he was right. Maybe the hardest part wasn't what was coming, it was what she had already faced. When they arrived at the building, she took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. People were already gathering near the entrance. Some were familiar faces from the previous meetings, while others were new individuals who had heard about what happened and wanted to support fairness. The atmosphere was calm but serious. She could feel a sense of anticipation among the crowd, as if everyone understood this day carried weight. Inside, the large hall had been rearranged again. This time, a long table stood at the front, with several officials seated behind it. They looked more alert and respectful than before. Perhaps the pressure of public attention had changed their attitude. Or maybe they finally realized the impact of their actions. As she walked in, the room grew quieter. She didn't want the attention, but she understood why it was there. What she had gone through had touched many people. The coordinator gestured for her to take a seat. She sat down, noticing how different she felt today. Still nervous, but stronger, more centered. The meeting began with formal introductions, but her mind wandered slightly. She remembered the first time she sat in a similar room, scared to speak, unsure if anyone would believe her. Today, though, there were people behind her, people who had witnessed everything and stood by her. When it was her turn to talk, she stood up slowly. The microphones in front of her seemed too large, too intimidating, but she pushed those thoughts aside. "I'm here today," she began softly, "because I believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect. What happened to me was painful, but what matters now is how we move forward. Not just for me, but for others who might face the same thing." Her voice was steady, even though she could feel her heartbeat echoing inside her chest. "I'm not here to create conflict," she continued. "I just want fairness. And I hope this experience becomes a reminder that no one should be judged without being heard." Her eyes met several officials sitting in front of her. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded slightly, acknowledging her words. After she finished, he stepped forward to speak next. His voice was calm but firm. "What I saw that day was wrong," he said, "and I couldn't ignore it. None of us should ignore things like that. When someone is treated unfairly, it affects all of us. Today isn't about pointing fingers, it's about choosing to do better." The room was silent as he finished. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the officials, an older man who had previously acted distant, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "You're right," he said quietly. "What happened was wrong, and I want to apologize for the way things were handled. We need to change how we approach situations like this." A soft gasp rippled through the room. She hadn't expected an apology, especially not from someone who had seemed so unmoved before. Another official spoke up as well. We've reviewed everything, and we're taking steps to ensure incidents like this don't repeat. Training will be updated, procedures will be changed, and accountability will be enforced. Hearing those words made her chest tighten with emotion. Not sadness relief, validation. She had hoped for fairness, not revenge. And now she was seeing it unfold. The discussion continued for nearly an hour. People shared ideas, concerns, and suggestions. No one raised their voice. No one dismissed her experience. It felt like the start of something meaningful. When the meeting ended, she stepped outside into the bright afternoon light. For the first time in days, it felt like she could breathe deeply without tension. He joined her, walking beside her as people approached to thank her for speaking up. She smiled politely, still overwhelmed by the attention. Finally, when the crowd started to thin, he turned to her. "You did something important today," he said. "So did you," she replied. They walked slowly toward the car, but before reaching it, she stopped and looked around. The sky was clear, the breeze gentle, and the world felt strangely new. "Do you realize," she said quietly, "that none of this would have happened if you hadn't stood up for me that day?" He shook his head. "All I did was speak up. You're the one who carried it forward." She stared at him for a moment, grateful in a way she couldn't fully express, not because he had rescued her, because he had believed her when it mattered most. On the drive back, the car was filled with a warm silence. Not heavy, not tense, just peaceful. A silence that comes when something difficult has finally been resolved. When they reached her house, she hesitated before opening the door. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Life," he said with a small smile. "Life goes on. And you go on stronger than before." She exhaled slowly, feeling the truth of his words settle inside her. "Will we still talk?" she asked, unsure how to phrase it. "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere." A gentle warmth spread across her chest. She nodded, then stepped out of the car. As she walked toward her door, she felt a calmness settle over her. She paused for a moment before going inside, turning back to look at him still sitting in the car. He waved lightly, and she smiled. Inside, the house felt different, lighter somehow. She sat down on the sofa and closed her eyes. The last few days replayed in her mind, but this time they didn't bring pain. They brought strength. She realized something important. She may have faced disrespect. She may have been humiliated, but she refused to stay broken. She stood up, spoke out, and changed something bigger than herself. And in doing so, she discovered her own courage. She also realized that sometimes, in the hardest moments, people appear who change everything, not by doing grand acts, but by choosing kindness when it matters most. She opened her eyes and let out a long breath. The world outside continued as usual, cars passing, birds chirping, neighbors chatting. But inside her, something had shifted forever. She knew her journey wasn't over. Life would still bring challenges. But now she had a voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The next day, she received a message from him, meeting later. "Just to check in." She smiled, typed a reply, and felt a warmth settle deep inside her heart. Whatever came next, she wasn't walking into it alone, and as she sat near the window, watching the sun slowly move across the sky, she realized something simple but powerful. Some stories don't end with a dramatic moment. They end quietly, with peace, and sometimes that is the most beautiful ending of all.